Hi guys. So if you read my discussion post about the new way of solving quadratic equations, if you watched the video, you may have noticed that he went through an example, but didn't go into too much detail on how it works. And I had to go through a few examples myself to figure out how it works and what happens if you're in different situations to kind of figure out the steps. So I figure I will demonstrate it for you and kind of explain where it comes from. So let's start with the quadratic formula because that's sort of the basis for this whole thing. So the quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So we can actually split the quadratic formula up as two sections so that you have the plus or minus in between. So I can actually rewrite this as negative b over 2a, which you may recognize. Well, actually, we haven't gotten to that part. Week 5, that will come up. But negative b over 2a, and then plus or minus the square root part, so b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So the key the key with this new method is this negative b over 2a part. And so we are basically going to work off of that. So you have a quadratic ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And then we were looking for the sum and the product. So he uses the sum and the product, but it's not exactly the sum and the product because we're looking at the negative b over 2a, and then we're looking at a times c, which if you factor by grouping the a times c is familiar. So the way it gets set up is that we have, we're setting it up as something that we can multiply out. And we actually set that equal to a times c. So not just whatever the last number is. If you have coefficient, it's a times c. So we're setting it equal to that. And then we're using negative b over 2a in each section, and then we add u and we subtract u. And so that's your setup. Then you multiply that out, and you end up with an easier quadratic to solve because you just have to get everything on one side and get your u squared, and then you take the square root. And then you plug it basically back in to get your solutions, because your solutions, once you figure out what u is, it's going to be negative b over 2a plus u and negative b over 2a minus u. So your goal, you're kind of doing the quadratic formula, but in a way that's easier. So let's see, I have several examples here. That one comes out. Sure, we can do this one. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example. And let's say we have x squared minus 6x plus 12 equals 0. And actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to move this over so that we can see it next to here. So we have x squared minus 6x plus 12 equals 0. So we're using the negative b over 2a, negative b over 2a. So our b is negative 6. So we have a negative, then negative 6, we have 2, and a is 1. So we get 6 over 2, so we get 3. So we're going to use 3 plus u and 3 minus u. Now we set it equal to what he calls the product, but that's going to be a times c. So a here is 1, so that's just going to be 1 times 12. A times c is 1 times 12, which is just 12. So we're going to just set that equal to 12. So now we're going to multiply on the left side. We're going to FOIL, and this is the difference of two squares, so this is one of the special products, and this will give us 9 minus u squared. This is the beauty about it, is that it always will multiply out to something really nice. And then you solve for u squared. So I'm going to subtract 9 from both sides. I get negative u squared equals 3. I need to divide both sides by negative 1, so I get a positive u squared equals negative 3. And then you take the square root. So you get plus or minus the square root of negative 3, which is actually an imaginary number. So that's going to be u equals plus or minus I times the square root of 3. I like to put my I before the square root so it doesn't look like it's in the square root. So once you've done that, then your solution is just 3 plus that and 3 minus that. So one solution is x equals 3 plus I times the square root of 3. And then the second solution is 3 minus I times the square root of 3. And you would get those same solutions if you're going through the quadratic formula, but here you don't really have to worry about so much the square root, getting everything inside correctly, because that's usually where people make a mistake, is with sign errors or multiplication errors. This is actually a little bit easier, but you get the same answer, and it's all derived from the quadratic formula in a way. Okay, now I still haven't figured out quite how this works if you have a coefficient in front. Say instead of x squared minus 2x plus 12, it is 2x, because I've tried to work through it out here and it doesn't actually come up with the right answer. So that is something that I need to do more research from, but as long as your coefficient is 1 as a, it always works out.